Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brody Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and with me today is Stephanie Gray, who is a nurse practitioner and someone with so many letters after her name that I can't even begin to describe them all, but I can tell you that she has a doctorate focused on estrogen metabolism. She has a master's in Metabolic Nutritional Medicine, and she deals with integrative, anti-aging, and functional medicine. She's arguably one of the Midwest's most credentialed female healthcare providers, and she is the author of a book called Your Longevity Blueprint, which I was just looking over today. It's an excellent introduction to functional medicine and what that's all about. And she is really passionate about putting it all together and making sure that no pieces of your health are left out. She was describing it to me as just like neglecting a room in your house isn't so good. if you're responsible for the upkeep of this house, you can't ignore any of the rooms or any of the parts in it. And so we're gonna just see where this conversation goes today. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me here on A Healthy Curiosity.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am always curious as to what motivates people to do the work that they do. And you shared with me that you have struggled with some health issues of your own in the past. And so I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing what some of those issues were and how that led you to do the work that you're doing today.
Sure. So I was very blessed when I was going through my health struggles to have had this functional medicine background because it just helped me tremendously. So I was born in what I consider to be a pretty healthy family. We always went to the chiropractor. We were eating clean home-cooked meals. We were always engaged in some sort of physical activity and really felt blessed just raising a healthy family. Yet around about the age 30, I started to struggle with tachycardia episodes. And what that means is just very fast heart rate. So sitting at my desk in my, healthy functional medicine practice, my heart took off to the races and walked down the hallway and my nurse looked at me like I was going to pass out. I was very pale and I literally didn't know what was happening. I wasn't even registering for me to buzz my husband, who's our office manager, to intercom him on my phone. I was just so disoriented. I wasn't sure what was happening. And so even though I thought I was healthy, which I was for the most part, there were several other aspects of my health that I had been neglecting. And so, through my struggles, I figured if I as a functional medicine practitioner needed a blueprint, I really needed something to organize, my thoughts as far as taking care of and maintaining my body. What do my patients need? Certainly my patients need some sort of clarification on all of the steps that they're going to need to better their health. And for me, that boiled down to so many things. I really looked into not only my food sensitivities, but I ended up having fructose intolerance and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. For me, I didn't have a lot of lower gastrointestinal issues. They were more upper, and I had so much pressure and what I would describe as upper gastrointestinal fullness, that air was pressing on my heart, causing palpitations, and also, literally eliciting some fast heart rate episodes. I was eating almost so clean that I was on too low of a salt diet. I needed to up my salt intake to raise my blood pressure. I had a lot of genetic variants that my response to stimulants was so magnified. Any, bright lights, any loud music would just overstimulate me. And I had a lot of stress as well that I needed to learn to manage. And so I had quite a few things that I needed to deal with to regain my health. And so through my health struggles, my husband said, man, we really need to create a blueprint for our patients. If you need this, they need this too. And so let's do this together. And so as I built back my health, I decided to write a book and walk patients through a 8 or 9 step blueprint process so that they could address various aspects of their health. So that's kind of the short version there.
Wow, I'm struck by first off just that your heart. So if I understand you correctly, your heart racing and scary tachycardia, palpitations, that kind of thing was actually coming from gut issues. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it was coming from several issues, but one of which was gut issues. And a lot of patients think, oh, if I have food sensitivities, I must have diarrhea or bloating or whatnot, and that's not always the case. I mean, to this day, if I have food that even has cross contamination of gluten, my tachycardia won't last forever, but I'll have a few minutes of very fast heart rate. And so, that's not the first thing patients or even a cardiologist is going to think. A cardiologist is going to tell me to take a medication to control my heart rate. And I knew there was more to my story. I knew that taking that medication wouldn't tell me why this was happening to me. And so part of that why, you bet, was looking for food sensitivities and not just, gluten, but I ended up having to learn how to abide by a low FODMAP diet. The foods that were beneficial, the fermented foods, for a while I didn't tolerate because I had so much pressure. I needed to actually back off on those foods. And interestingly, those foods weren't going to show up on my food sensitivity test because I wasn't having an immunologic reaction to those foods. Because I had SIBO and the fructose intolerance, I needed to get on that low FODMAP diet. And so diet changes for me they were huge. And for me as a practitioner, that really solidified what I was doing with my patients because, if I was going to commit, I had to commit 100% for my health. And so that really made me further encourage my patients to go the extra step, not just commit 90%, but 100% to whatever dietary changes they need to make to regain their health.
Well, it's really inspiring that you're able to take your own situation and use it as a place to start helping others. That's a really, really beautiful thing. And I'd love to walk through the steps that you articulate in your book. Um, does and so do you start with gut health? Is that usually? I mean, it seems to me like that's often where I start with people, just because it's so central in absolutely every
Essential.
system of
Yeah.
the body, right? It's like that we really are not just what we eat, but what we can digest, and that can contribute to literally every other system of the body. So, um,
You
and I
bet.
know, of course, as a functional medicine practitioner, you're interested in how all the systems tie together. And so, yeah, so walk us through how if we have any symptoms that are subpar, basically food is something we can't rule out, correct?
Correct. I want to answer that question you had. Is chapter one, gut health, kind of where I start with all my patients. And you bet, it really is the most important chapter. That's why it's chapter one. So,
Right.
if
First
you're
things first.
exactly for a reason, if your home is built on a weak or improperly built foundation, that house is going to crumble. And the same is true for our body. We must have a healthy foundation upon which to build good health. And so in chapter one, I discuss ways to build healthy, gastrointestinal health. So I do discuss ways to remove food sensitivities, but also gut infections. And I think that has been neglected with many of my patients. They come to me and maybe they have been able to get tested, maybe even at their chiropractor, for food sensitivities, and they've removed those, but they haven't necessarily maybe had a stool test further looking at digestion or looking for gastrointestinal infections. And so that's part of chapter two or chapter one, excuse me. So within each chapter of the book, I kind of discuss, a couple different things. So I do discuss most important nutraceutical products for us, but I also discuss the most progressive available functional medicine testing options. So for chapter one, that would be ways to get food sensitivity testing done, or even the stool test. And those test results are really a unique marker of, my patient's human identity. And that really helps me formulate a plan to build their health. And so, within each chapter, I think what sets functional medicine practitioners aside are those testing options that can't always be offered at a conventional provider's office.
Yeah, and so many of those tests are things that give us insight that we would be very difficult to come to simply by trial and error.
Exactly. Yep. Testing is
And
so valuable.
yeah, um, And so, in your own life, that you mentioned SIBO and kind of upper GI issues. Um, what are the tests that people need to know about for SIBO?
So
Small
SIBO is small.
intestine
Yes.
bacterial overgrowth. Yes.
Yeah, just to clarify that. So the small intestine can be a little difficult to measure problems within because, as you can imagine, it's kind of in the middle. So you can have a colonoscopy where a doctor can, look with a scope to see what's going on in your colon. We can do a stool test to really see what's happening with a lower digestive system with a colon. But the small intestine is really difficult to access. And so the best test that's currently available is a breath test. And so we have patients go on a fairly restrictive diet for a few days where they would have to remove the foods that could be feeding, the bacteria. And then we have them drink a sugary solution, which is not pleasant. But the theory is if they do have those organisms and we, feed them with that sugar, then what they're going to blow out on that breath test is methane and hydrogen. And so that was a test that I did for myself and that I order on several patients to really assess if the issues are lying within the small intestine. And unfortunately, the breath test is really the best test that we know of right now to detect those issues.
Great. Thanks for that. One other question that commonly comes up, I find that there's a lot of confusion around gluten sensitivity versus celiac versus it's all just a big fad. I'd love for you to clarify for us sort of what the testing is and the limits of the testing regarding gluten.
Yeah, so I do think with everything in life, fads are going to come and go. I think, unfortunately, those who may be saying, gluten sensitivity is a fad, I think 10, 20 years from now, we're really going to know if that was a fad or not, because there has been clear evidence that patients who really do have gluten sensitivity, who are genetically primed, which we know genetic testing is valid if they're genetically primed to having problems with gluten. And I can even give you an example for me. My genetic testing for celiac was positive, and I have actually known that for years because when I first got into functional medicine, I tested myself. Now, you better believe me, I hoped that I would not develop a gluten sensitivity or celiac. But when I was having all these issues, after being maybe 80% gluten-free for years, I just had made that entire commitment. I had tested myself when I was having the tachycardia, and my gluten was through the roof high. And one of my celiac markers in the bloodstream, some of my antibodies were also elevated. Now, per conventional standards, to be fully diagnosed with celiac, you have to have enough damage to your, small intestine so that, when the doctor scopes you, with a biopsy, they can assess that damage. That damage is there. I did have a biopsy because I wanted to know if that damage was there, and it was not. So I actually didn't meet full criteria for celiac. But what was going to happen if I continued to eat the gluten? Clearly, I was on the way.
Exactly. Yeah,
Clearly.
and that's sort of what I think is so difficult about this issue is that you can that even if you're not quote unquote celiac, you could be heading in that direction and not know it,
And
and you don't want to cross that line.
right. And for me, I'm very thankful that I was having these health issues because it helped me identify and then fully commit 100%. So some people may claim that, oh, a lot of patients are now having, antibodies to gluten. Well, I'd rather, for my own health, remove the gluten and not progress to celiac. And I think that's the case with many patients. I mean, autoimmune diseases are on the rise. We can't argue with that, as are food sensitivities. And I think that's oftentimes due to the herbicides and the pesticides and the genetically modified foods. Our poor immune systems are like, oh, what do we do? What do we do with these foods? And so,
and yeah, and a lot of the things that getting put on crops and getting into soil kill off the microbes that grow on the vegetables that we're eating and grow, and so our guts just don't have it's really different than the guts of our ancestors.
and then those toxins also mess with our endocrine system. So now
Yeah,
it's
let's talk
affecting
about that.
affecting our hormones.
Yeah, let's talk about especially hormones and balancing and the fact that so much about preventing estrogen related cancers. And so I'd love to hear about what important steps we can take in terms of achieving hormone balance and minimizing our risk.
Yeah, so I think, again, one thing that I mentioned within the book really is the importance of getting tested. And so I think all patients should have their hormone levels tested, when they're young, even 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and just kind of track their levels so that they know what their optimal baseline was. But specifically, the best test to assess how your liver is handling estrogen is through the urine. So the only way we can measure phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification of estrogen is in the urine. And so there are several large functional medicine labs that offer this urine. It's just called a urine hormone metabolite assessment. And the good news is, unlike genetics, we can't necessarily change our genetics. We can work to influence them for the better. But with a lot of these tests, this one in specific, if we find that phase 1 or phase 2 estrogen metabolism isn't optimal, there are things we can do nutritionally to influence them. So if phase 1 is not optimal, then we recommend patients consume more of the cruciferous vegetables. So broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, Brussels sprouts. Those are the foods that if you cut the stem, you'll see a crux or a cross there. So those foods are extremely
important. Oh, that's cruciferous. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand.
I know. When someone finally told me that, I thought, oh, why didn't they tell me this years ago? So those foods are very important. And oftentimes if diet changes aren't improving, phase 1 estrogen metabolism on that test, then we put patients on a supplement called DIM. And I studied that nutrient for my doctorate. So DIM is like eating 6 pounds of those vegetables per day. It's a very potent extract from the cruciferous family. And DIM is even being studied. If you go to, National Cancer Institute, or clinicaltrials.gov, you can see DIM even being used in clinical trials currently. It has anti-cancerous properties. It's just one nutrient that we can take to help reduce risk of estrogen-related cancer. So that's important for men, not just women. Prostate cancer, colon cancer, breast, ovarian, and uterine are all related to estrogen metabolism. So females and males both can greatly benefit from taking DIM or eating those cruciferous vegetables. And then phase 2 estrogen metabolism, if found to be poor, can really be boosted by methyl donors. And so we think of B vitamins here being very important. So taking a B complex can really help as well, but you want to make sure you're not taking cheap, synthetic, man-made B vitamins. You want to take the best, most easily absorbed form. So typically, B12, that would be methylcobalamin, and then of B9, rather than taking folic acid, that would be something like methylfolate. So those two nutrients, the DIM and the methylated B complex, can be very important for reducing risk of estrogen-related cancers.
Quick announcement about a mind-body detox day that I'm going to be hosting on April 14th, which is a Saturday. In Chinese medicine philosophy, the energies of the seasons are reflected in our bodies and minds and emotions as well. And the season of the spring is associated with the liver, which is all about new growth. And also detoxifying our lives from what no longer serves us. And this happens on a mental, emotional, and spiritual as well as physical level. So I'm inviting you to join me for a day where we're going to align with the chi of spring and support our livers so that we can handle stress better, so that we can support our courage, clarity, creativity, and self-expression, keep ourselves in rhythm digestively, reproductively, diurnally, and adapt and evolve into who we are becoming next. We're going to be doing Qigong, breathing, meditation. We're going to be getting into dietary and herbal tips for the change of seasons, as well as acupoints for stress and stress-related problems. We'll go into EFT and tapping for limiting beliefs, and we'll play with essential oils. If you want in, head over to brodywelch.com/mind-body-detox and claim your spot. Hope to see you there. And also, if you love live events, mark your calendars for my retreat that I'm going to be hosting in Mexico at Present Moment Retreat Center, February 16th through 23rd of 2019. That's next year. Get out of the cold and wet and dreary and come hang out on the beach with me. It's going to be super fun. Details soon. But Mind Body Detox Day, April 14th. Would love to have you join me. Now back to today's show. Is DIM appropriate if you have low estrogen?
So it depends. So when we think of cancer risk, a lot of individuals think, well, you have to have high estrogen to, get an estrogen-related cancer, and that's not true. So even patients with lower levels of estrogen, if that estrogen is not being cleared properly through the body, which we can really assess on this fancy test, then DIM would be appropriate for that patient. Now, for some patients who have low estrogen, if we give them DIM and it helps them clear out more estrogen, they may actually exhibit symptoms of low estrogen. So they may get hot flashes or brain fog. So it's case-by-case basis. I still use it in those patients, but I really want to make sure I'm only giving it to those that really need it because I don't want to cause, worsening symptoms.
Yeah, again, back to testing and its importance.
It just is. It's so valuable.
Yeah. I'd love to have you explain to us a little bit about why estrogen-related cancers are on the rise and why they're so prevalent and what we can do to prevent exposure.
Sure. So I think my belief, at least from what I've heard and read, listened to at various conferences, that a lot of times those cancers may be on the rise because we have so many different endocrine disrupting chemicals in our lives. And so some of these can come from, I live in Iowa, so the herbicides and the pesticides, those chemicals are floating around in the air. I have a cornfield by my house. So I know that I'm exposed, not just in the foods that I'm eating, but literally in the air I'm breathing to these toxins. Oftentimes also in our personal care products, parabens and phthalates and fragrances, things that we maybe didn't think about growing up, products we were lathering all over our skin, believe it or not, can bind to estrogen receptors. These chemicals have properties and chemical structure similar to estrogens, and so they can bind to our estrogen receptors and literally cause hormone imbalances. A lot of my patients I'm finding have heavy periods and endometriosis, and they're having high levels of estrogen, and unfortunately the stressful life they live is then robbing them of progesterone. So they have a low progesterone, high estrogen state. They're not hormonally sound, and that can lead to all kinds of problems. And so one thing that we do with our patients to help get rid of those toxins is really teach them how to eat clean, to buy organic, to not eat out of plastic containers or drink out of plastic water bottles, and really help promote detoxification to get those toxins out of their life, doing a liver detox or sitting in an infrared sauna. They're just choices we make every single day that can really impact our hormone status. And we can't fix everything at once, but we can help our patients, work to make small changes that eventually will lead to big changes with their hormones.
Awesome. And I think it's worth pointing out that this isn't just for prevention of cancer, but it can also be as simple as things like PMS or helping women with their cycle just have an easier time, correct?
Absolutely, yes. A lot of patients aren't cycling at all, or others have irregular cycles or heavy bleeding, or they have the PMS or PMDD. You bet, everything I had just mentioned would apply to those symptoms, those states as well.
You mentioned doing liver detox. Is this the kind of thing that people can do on their own, or it's like what's important to know about detoxing? Because a lot of times people think about like, oh, I'll do a juice fast, or I'll do, and I know that there's important things like phase 1 versus phase 2 detoxification, and the fact that we need to be able to get to the fat soluble toxins in order to get them out of the body. And so could you speak to a little bit about how we might go about helping our livers?
Yes. Well, I'm going to go back to testing just because I'm
Yeah.
such a big fan of testing. Usually, I have patients who come into my office and say, I want to detox. I have mercury in my mouth. I want to detox. And I usually say, okay, let's take a deep breath and let's think about how we can get your body in the best shape so that when you detox, you have the most successful detox that you could. And so that's where we look at a couple things. We look at genetics to see one's risk, to see if they're genetically set up to be a great detoxifier or a poor detoxifier. And then I love running a nutritional assessment on my patients. You had alluded to phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox pathways. And so both of those pathways are dependent on so many nutrients. And so I do want to see if my patients are low in those nutrients from the medications they're taking or from just a poor diet. And so first, before detoxing, I always have patients do this nutritional test. And then for a few months, I really have them saturate their body with all the nutrients necessary for detoxification. So for instance, I've had patients with really low glutathione levels, and glutathione is just extremely important for detoxification. And so I might put them on glutathione a few months, or B vitamins or magnesium or whatever nutrients they need before we jump into bentonite clay and fiber powder and, milk thistle and dandelion and artichoke and, all of those well-known kind of liver detox agents, because we want to get the body in better shape before, we try to detox them, because patients can get sicker quicker if we detox them too fast.
That makes a lot of sense, really, like equipping the body to handle what you're going to ask it to do, especially if it's not good at that, particularly on a day-to-day basis. It's like, yeah, it seems like a kind thing to do.
A lot of patients are right. They do need to detox, but I'm not going to detox them until I get their body in better shape. And even going back to, the patient I mentioned who, came in maybe worried about having mercury in their mouth. A lot of times I might, prime the detoxification pathways first, have them get the metal removed, and then following that, then put them on a more aggressive liver detoxification program. So there are some things patients can do on their own, but I do think it's just going to better the success if they can have some of these tests done to really give them what they need to get the detox running a little more successfully. That makes sense.
You are a powerful being, and it's really hard to feel that way if you're stressed, overwhelmed, or routinely overriding your body's cries for rest, nourishment, movement, and joy. You deserve to make time to take care of yourself and to enjoy your life, not just get through the day. If you are ready to stop putting yourself last on your own to-do list, you're invited to claim one of the last few spots for the May round of Level Up Your Life, my transformation incubator. We focus on the basics of self-care, but the kind of evolution people experience goes so much deeper. They talk about having more confidence in expressing themselves, finding their voices. They feel stronger, lighter, happier, clearer, and way more stress resilient. Like Rachel, who shares, I'm feeling more comfortable and present in my body, and I can feel the empowerment that comes with that, both physically and also in terms of strengthened boundaries. Thank you for this and for keeping me on this journey of learning, deepening, and growing. It's really an incredible community of conscious women who are serious about showing up differently in the world and living in alignment with the person they know themselves to be. So if you're ready to start living powerfully, I'd love to talk to you. Head to brodywelch.com/level-up and schedule your free call. We'll see if it's a good fit. Now back to the show. I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about cardiovascular health, just because it's the kind of thing that, again, there's a lot of confusion out there. Cholesterol, is it really, is it really as important to determining whether or not we're at risk for a cardiovascular incident or not?
Sure.
What do we need to know about the size of the particles? What do we need to know about good fat versus bad fat? That's another question that I get a lot, in terms of how we can responsibly take care of our blood vessels and our heart.
Yeah. So in the book, I relate the, cardiovascular system in your body to the plumbing system in your home. You don't want clogged pipes in your home, because if you've ever experienced a pipe bursting, you know how much damage that can cause. And similarly in your body, you want to keep those arteries clear. There have been a lot of books written on maybe like the myths about cholesterol, because cholesterol is extremely important. And for years, conventional providers have been working with patients to quench that cholesterol, which is one of my biggest.
Can I just pause you there? Like, tell us a little bit about why cholesterol is important. Why do we need it?
Yeah. So I have a hormone clinic, and a lot of times I'll see men come in with symptoms of low libido or erectile dysfunction. They're very concerned that they have low testosterone, and a lot of times they're right. And for those patients who have low testosterone, one of the first things that I ask them is, are you taking a statin medication? Are you taking a cholesterol blocking medication? Because cholesterol is a precursor. It's absolutely necessary for your body to make hormones. And so if you're on a medication that's going to block cholesterol, you're not going to have the building blocks you need to make testosterone. And so for a lot of those male patients, if they're on statins, I'm taking them off, because I actually need their cholesterol to be higher to equip them to make more. So cholesterol for me, it's my pet peeve just because I work to boost patients' hormone levels. But, your brain is literally made out of fat. You need good fats in your life. You need to be consuming them for many processes in your body. And I think for years we got so hung up on thinking, oh, cholesterol is clogging our vessels, but cholesterol is not the problem. Inflammation is the problem. I mean, that's the root cause of all disease, really.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, that with inflammation is the problem, and then cholesterol is sent in to plug the leak, so to speak, or to shore up what might be a weakening blood vessel.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So the way I explain it to patients is, just as many patients with, low cholesterol have heart attacks as high have heart attacks. And so again, that cholesterol is not the problem. If we look at the vein, we don't want the vein to be, or the artery to be sticky and inflamed, because then more cholesterol is going to be more likely to get stuck and form a fatty streak. And then the next thing you know, throw a clot. So if you do have damage to those vessels, then you bet the cholesterol, or whatever you want to call it, that's floating around in the vessel, is going to try to make a patch to repair that damage. And that unfortunately can grow and get larger and then essentially occlude that vessel. And so what you want to do is you want to keep your vessels very elastic, very flexible, not inflamed, not sticky. You want to get your triglycerides down, and you want to have larger cholesterol particles, not smaller. Those smaller, dense LDL particles are the kind that can really get stuck and end up forming that fatty streak and throwing a clot. And so this is another example of where testing is so important, because you can have your inflammatory markers checked. You can have your small and large type of cholesterol checked. And so that's what truly can indicate risk. It's not just looking at the total number. We have to dig into these inflammatory pieces and the particle sizes, and then we make the decision on whether or not we really need to lower cholesterol, which usually that's not the case.
So in terms of how and why there might be inflammation in our blood vessels, some of that seems like it could be specific to a particular food that we're eating, for example. What else leads to that inflammation?
I think stress, as much as I don't want to admit it, because I have a lot of stress in my own life that I'm still working to manage, as we all are. It's an ongoing process. I think stress definitely can contribute to inflammation, and the foods that we're eating, you bet, that can, contribute to the intestinal permeability or the leaky gut. I think toxins that we mentioned briefly, toxins can trigger inflammation as well, and which is why detoxification is again so important. And then even infections. So Lyme disease, yeast overgrowth, mold toxicity, things that can affect our immune system, I think can also contribute. So those are probably the four main answers I'd have.
And if someone were to try to address inflammation from a dietary perspective, is it going to be more important, in your opinion, to focus on sugar, on fat, on something else entirely?
So because we all are genetically different, I'm going to come back to testing again. For some patients, they may not need to make as many diet changes as another. It's not as easy as saying everybody needs to be gluten-free, because maybe not everybody does need to be gluten-free. But I think having, a provider be able to offer the food sensitivity testing is of great value to that patient, because then they really do know which foods are contributing, are triggering that inflammation, and they can get those foods out. And that is an excellent first place to start.
It seems like if we're going to be testing every system of the body, is this like $250,000? Like how much is how much is a
No.
functional medicine assessment? How much of an investment is that in our health?
Good question. And I don't have an answer as far as how much, to test the whole blueprint. What are you looking at? But I will say about, half of the testing can be covered by insurance. So a lot of the hormone testing I do is covered by insurance. Even the fancy cholesterol breakdown I mentioned is often covered by insurance. A lot of the out-of-pocket expenses come from like the food sensitivity testing, or, meeting with a nutritional health coach. That may not be covered by insurance. So some patients are surprised that more is covered than they may think. Genetic testing is oftentimes not, but for $199, you can map your whole genome through 23andMe. The nutritional analysis I offer my patients is about $169 with a good insurance. So I think it's more affordable than it probably sounds like.
Well, that's really good to know. And I actually really appreciated how in your book you mentioned that the importance of investing in our health in things that insurance typically doesn't cover, like probiotics, or, of course, as an acupuncturist, like I've never taken insurance in my practice, but it's the kind of thing where
Yeah.
like, if it's the only thing that is going to work for you, is it worth, like if a handful of visits means the difference between being in pain every day versus not, then like, yeah, isn't that worth like a few $100s? Like, isn't that, and it's the kind of thing where, especially also in my coaching program, it's like getting people to invest in themselves in a preventative way is not at all what we're taught to think about in this culture. And it's much more wait till there is a problem and then react to it, as opposed to do the things that we know we need to do to bring all those pillars of health online, in a preventative way. It's like a lot of times, like it's that may be, it's like for the price of like a vacation, you can totally massively change the trajectory of health for your entire life. And it's the kind of thing that, people are still like, wow, I don't know, that seems like a lot. And it's me, it's like, well, yeah, there's, anyway, like, I appreciate that you make that point.
Well, thank you. It's like when we get cancer, oh my gosh, we'll sell everything because now I have a problem and I have to deal with it. But what if we spent, a fraction of that investing in our health ahead of time so that we don't get the cancer? But we haven't been trained to think that way. And I think a lot of times patients just don't know what testing is available. They don't know where to start. Functional medicine is overwhelming. And that kind of comes back to how we open. That's kind of my why I wrote the book. I want patients to know, hey, if this is what you can afford, let's start with chapter 1. Let's do food sensitivity testing and a stool test. And then when you're ready, let's move on to chapter 6, where I am comparing the heating and cooling system in the house to the endocrine system in the body, and let's do some hormone testing. So chapter by chapter, the patient can really look at, see, okay, I have addressed these rooms in my house or these organ systems in my body, but I haven't addressed these. Maybe we'll address these next. So I really hope that I was able to clarify for patients what is available, what they can do to maintain their health.
Stephanie, where can people get those lovely questionnaires for self-assessment that you were mentioning in terms of figuring out where they should probably start in cleaning out their house? I understand that you have a couple of really great free gifts for folks over, on some kind of website, the URL of which will be in the show notes. But could you tell us where to find that?
Absolutely. So the name of the book is yourlongevityblueprint.com. It's available everywhere books are sold and even on Amazon or on our website. So if you go to yourlongevityblueprint.com/YLB -bonus/, you'll get 2 of those PDFs. So one is a quick start guide. It really gives you a good intro into the book and each chapter. And then secondly is a PDF full of questionnaires that you are referencing. So check that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're about out of time, but I'm wondering if there's any last words that you would like to leave our listeners with today.
Well, I just want them to know that they don't have to go this alone. I think so many patients have been so diligent, doing their own research because they have to be their own advocate. And I just want them to know that there are resources like this book that, you could read the chapter on cardiovascular health and then go back to your provider and see if your provider would order some of the testing that I recommend, or find a contractor. That's chapter 9. Find a functional medicine practitioner who can help you with your building process. They're out there. You just have to find them.
Awesome. Well, Stephanie Gray, this has been a really informative chat, and your book will certainly have a place in my office, being a resource for folks. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for allowing me to spread the word. This was fun. Thank you for hosting the podcast.
Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to brodywelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.